In a fun follow up to a video we did yesterday, it seems that some on Fox News have found the courage to risk pissing off Donald Trump by discussing his disastrous results in one of their own Fox News polls, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, in a video we did yesterday, we discussed how a couple of very nervous MAGA Fox News personnel, one a pollster and the other one a host, really struggled to cope with the fact that the latest Fox News poll for Trump is disastrous. He's underwater in terms of approval and on a whole host of major issues. Despite that, they tried to spin it. Actually, Trump's got upward momentum. He's doing really, really well. And once his policies take effect, everyone's going to love it. And J.D. Vance is holding his own and Marco Rubio. We're not going to talk about Elon Musk, but everything's great. And it's the Democrats who suck. It was so funny watching them cope and spin in real time. And to be clear, polling for the Democrats is really bad. The Democrats are in a state of crisis that we quite frankly earned and we need to get out of. But it doesn't change the fact that Donald Trump is historically unpopular as a president. It seems that Fox News host Bret Baier has finally found the courage, unique among his fellow Fox News hosts, with the exception of Jessica Tarlov, to actually publicly discuss this, knowing that Trump obsessively watches Fox News and will probably be pissed off by the two clips I'm about to show you, starting with this one here.
Most voters oppose President Trump's efforts to reduce the number of government employees, changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and ranking near the bottom in support. His campaign promised to close the Department of Education. Well, today,
and that's exactly what Trump did, as a matter of fact. Donald Trump issued an executive order to close the Department of Education, which, by the way, he doesn't have the power to do. He would need an act of Congress to get it done, probably a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. He's not going to get it, but this is yet another example of Trump trying to hoard executive power unto himself, and we'll see what the courts say when it faces inevitable legal challenges. Here's another clip of Fox daring to discuss Donald Trump's really bad polls.
Education more expensive. New Fox polls show 92% of Democrats oppose shuttering the department, plus 81% of independents, and more than a third of Republicans.
That's really bad for Trump. 65% oppose this major power grab by Trump, which, by the way, to be fair, was also something he publicly campaigned on. Obviously, it doesn't make it right, doesn't make it legal, but he wasn't hiding it either. And he's trying to make good on this executive power grab, right? And again, we'll get into the disastrous consequences for actually Trump voters and Trump-aligned states in just a second. But since we're on the topic of bad polling for Trump, again, now that 538 is no longer in existence, rest in peace. ABC shuttered the effort. Former 538 founder Nate Silver, perhaps the most famous pollster, or rather polling polling analyst. He has his own blog called The Silver Bulletin where he does this as well. So we're going to turn to him. How popular is Donald Trump? Donald Trump has a -5 net approval rating in the latest Atlas Intel poll. 47% of Americans approve of the job he's doing, and 52% disapprove. The previous Atlas poll had Trump's approval almost dead even, 50.3% approval versus 49.7% disapproval. It's best not to make a big deal out about individual polls, but post-2024, Atlas ranks first in the Silver Bulletin pollster ratings, so their results are weighted fairly heavily in our average. This new release brought Trump's net approval down by 0.3 points. So, how's it looking so far? Donald Trump's disapproval is over 2 percentage points. 2.2, it looks like, percentage points as of the most recent aggregate. So not very good for Trump at all. As you can see here, -2, -5, -6, -5, +1. According to Echelon, Rasmussen has him up by 4. Hart Research has him down 4. Emerson College has him up 2. Quinnipiac has him down 11. And Ipsos has him down 8. So again, the shortest presidential honeymoon in the history of the United States, or at the very least since polls have become a predominant science, really since the age of President Roosevelt and President Truman. Really, really bad. Now, the other thing I want to point out, though, and I mentioned this briefly in a video we did covering Trump's executive order about the Department of Education, is the deleterious effect it would have on Republican-aligned states. This is an example of Trump basically spiting his own supporters, screwing his supporters over, which is something, quite frankly, that Republican politicians do time and time again. Well, before I dive in that again, I really want to emphasize this. Somebody who grew up, I was born in a purple state. I spent most of my life in a red state. I now live in a purple state again. But I am surrounded, by people who vote for Republican, whom I love, family members and friends, but who actually don't materially benefit from Republican governance, Republican leadership at the national or local level. I mean, when you look at it, red states tend to be poorer. I mean, again, there are exceptions here. There are exceptions, right? But on average, compare average blue states to average red states are poorer, less educated, less healthy, and much more dependent on federal subsidies than their blue counterparts. Okay, again, not to say that blue states don't have their issues. They obviously do. I want to make that very, very clear. But we don't actually see the fruits, largely speaking, of Republican governance. And Trump's decision to purge, to effectively eliminate the education department, that's not going to help his base. Trump's campaign promise to dismantle the Department of Education could prove more costly for red states than blue. Funding for public schools primarily falls to local and state governments, but federal funds work to fill the gaps. States that voted for Trump last November, on average, use more federal funding in their education apportions than states that voted for Vice President Harris. Quote, that dependence is, in large part, because they're just lower wealth states and they don't have the same capacity to step in and make up that difference, says Kevin Wellner, the director of National Education Policy Center, says he to Axios. Average federal spending in the 2021-2022 school year was 17% in Trump voting states compared to 11% in states that voted for Harris. At 23%, Mississippi had the highest proportion of federal public school funding that school year, with South Dakota and Arkansas following with 22% each. New York, at 7%, had the lowest. Mississippi spends an average of $12,390 on public K-12 spending per student, compared to New York's $33,440 per the Education Data Initiative. Anywhere from 11 to 14% of public school funding is federal, Wellner said. That figure was on the higher end after the start of the pandemic, but has since decreased. Even if the education department is disbanded, programs within its purview could fall to other federal agencies. Head Start, for example, is already run by the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump has talked about that, potentially throwing various programs to other departments. But again, this is going to be incredibly disruptive, according to the experts, under the best case scenario. States could likely handle cuts to federal education funding in different ways. Those that have more low-income families and in turn receive higher shares of Title I funding would feel the impact most. Quote, in wealthier states, we would probably see some reduced spending for students and some increased state allocations. Quote, in states that are already financially strained because they have less wealth, this could simply result in less funding and fewer resources for the students. So again, this is where it will backfire most likely on the very states that elected Trump and put him in a position to harm them the way that he's about to. And again, this is just what I mean, where a longstanding critique I have of the Republican Party is not that they lack talent. Republican leaders are very talented and very clever in their own way. They just suck at governing because they have a philosophy that's terrible for large-scale societies and large-scale governments. It's like the notion of libertarianism. I know, to me, if you're a libertarian, you're just a shy Republican, and I understand why it's enamored so many people, but there's no evidence that a society can function on any sort of scale with a libertarian government and a libertarian worldview. It's one of those things that might make some sort of sense on an interpersonal level, but once you try to, project it outwards onto a country of 50 million, 100 million, 330 million, like the United States, it just doesn't work. What we're seeing is, again, the results of terrible Republican governance. And again, to be clear, Democrats have their issues. Democratic governance is not perfect. I would just argue at the federal level, certainly, and I would argue on average, even at the state level, it's just better than the Republican alternative. So, but again, kudos to Fox News for finding its courage to at least briefly on air risk pissing off Donald Trump and his cult by pointing out some of his disastrous polling. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.